The first autumn leaves fell over the brick streets of Norwich, England in 1941, painting the city in a blaze of amber and gold. The war had woven itself into every thread of daily life, yet Eleanor Harding moved through it with a quiet grace. She wore her mother's old wool coat, the hem repaired so many times it was soft as flannel, and a pair of scuffed Oxford shoes. Her hands, always stained with ink, marked her as a teacher, one of the last at St. Agnes Girls' School. She taught history in a world that seemed to be forgetting its own. Every morning she would cycle past sandbagged windows and ration queues, the basket of her bicycle clattering with lesson plans, and she would think of James. James Whitaker had been a journalist in Norwich, a wiry, dark-haired man whose eyes always seemed to be searching for meaning beyond the obvious. They'd met at a poetry reading, both of them shivering in a cold church hall, clutching mugs of weak tea. He'd made her laugh, quoting Yeats and rolling his eyes at the stilted delivery of the vicar. Their friendship grew in the way of wartime courtships, no frills, no promises, but a deep and urgent honesty. Their first kiss had been stolen in the shadow of the cathedral, under the chime of bells muffled by blackout curtains. It was the sort of kiss that made the world fall away, leaving only two beating hearts and the sound of rain. In 1940, James was sent to cover the evacuation at Dunkirk. He'd written her from France, the letter smudged and hurried. "Dearest Nell," it began, "I saw men wading into the sea, their faces set against the horizon as if the world itself might open up and swallow them. I wish you were here to remind me that hope is not a foolish thing. I'll be home soon. Love always, James." But James did not return after Dunkirk. Instead, he lingered in France, filing dispatches from the front lines, sending Eleanor a letter every week. Sometimes those letters were little more than a pressed wildflower between two scraps of paper, or a single sentence. "I dreamt of your hands last night." Eleanor read each one as if it were oxygen, folding and unfolding them until the creases became as familiar as her own skin. As the months dragged on, the letters grew infrequent. She waited at the post office every Saturday, stomach knotted with hope and dread. The world shrank to the size of her mailbox. Then, in the spring of 1941, the letters stopped altogether. Rumours filtered in. James's last column mentioned a village outside Amiens, heavy shelling, the roads choked with refugees. Eleanor read and reread the newsprint, searching for a clue, a sign he might still be alive. The Red Cross could offer no answers. The army had no record of his capture. Officially, he was missing, presumed dead, but Eleanor refused to believe it. She moved through her days like a ghost, teaching history to girls whose fathers and brothers were vanishing into the maw of war. At night, she lit a single candle for James and read his letters by its trembling light. "Nell, you are the fire in my coldest days. If I do not come home, promise me you'll keep believing." She clung to those words, repeating them like a prayer. The city was battered by nightly air raids. Eleanor slept in the school's cellar with the other teachers, listening to the distant thunder of bombs. She kept James's last letter in her pocket, a talisman against despair. Even in the darkness, she imagined his voice, steady and clear. Hope is not a foolish thing. One afternoon in late summer, Eleanor cycled to the river's edge, seeking solace in the hush of the water. The city was quiet, too quiet. She sat on the bank, the grass cool beneath her, and closed her eyes. The memory of James was so vivid, his hands tracing the line of her jaw, the rough stubble of his chin, the way he'd say her name as if it were the answer to every question. She pressed her fingers to her lips, willing herself not to cry. She would not believe he was gone. Not while his words lived in her heart. Time, that relentless river, carried her forward. The war ground on. Rations tightened. She learned to stretch a single egg for a week, to make soup from scraps, to mend her raincoat for the 100th time. The girls at school asked her if she was married, if she had sweethearts at the front. She smiled softly and told them, "I'm waiting for someone." They giggled, imagining dances and chocolates, not knowing the weight of waiting. In the winter of 1942, a telegram arrived for Eleanor. Her hands shook as she opened it. "No news, stop, regret, unable to confirm whereabouts, stop, do not lose hope, stop, British Red Cross." She stared at the words until they blurred, then tucked the telegram away with James's letters. She went on, teaching about the kings and queens of England, about battles fought and lost and won, all the while wondering if history might one day record her own small story, a woman who had loved and waited and never surrendered hope. Outside, the world was changing. The Americans arrived, their uniforms crisp and their laughter loud in the pubs. The city was filled with foreign voices, new fears, new rumors. Eleanor watched them from the window of her classroom, remembering James's tales of Paris, of strangers sharing cigarettes and stories in the dark. She envied their certainty, their belief in victory. She held fast to her own kind of faith. The years crept by. Eleanor's hair grew longer, the brown streaked with silver. The war ebbed and flowed, a distant thunder now, but still present, like a storm just beyond the horizon. She never missed a Saturday at the post office, though her visits grew quieter, her hopes more fragile. The world around her rebuilt itself in small ways. New curtains in the school, fresh paint on the door, the laughter of children returning to the playground. Yet every joy was shadowed by absence. On a rain-soaked afternoon in the spring of 1945, as the city buzzed with rumors of peace, Eleanor sat in her classroom, grading essays by candlelight. The radio played softly, the voice of the announcer crackling with excitement. Berlin has fallen. The war in Europe is over. The girls burst into the streets waving Union Jacks, their faces alight with hope. Eleanor stood at the window, watching them dance in the puddles, her heart aching with longing. She whispered James's name, her breath fogging the glass. That night, the entire city celebrated. Bonfires blazed in the squares, the blackout curtains torn down at last. Eleanor joined her neighbors, holding a mug of weak tea, her smile tentative. They sang old songs, their voices trembling with relief. But amid the jubilation, Eleanor's heart remained tethered to hope and memory. She could not join in the wild joy. Not yet. A week later, a letter arrived. The envelope was battered, the handwriting shaky, but unmistakable. James Whitaker. Eleanor's hands trembled as she opened it, her breath caught somewhere between a sob and a laugh. "Nell, my dearest," the letter began, "I am writing to you from a hospital in Lyon. I have been here for months, wounded but alive. I do not know how long it will be before I can return to you, but I have never stopped thinking of you. Each night I dreamed of your face, your voice, your stubborn, beautiful hope. I do not know if you will receive this or if you have moved on. I would not blame you. But if you are still waiting, know that I am trying to come home to you. Love always, James." Eleanor wept, the tears soaking the letter until the ink ran. She pressed the page to her heart, laughing and crying at once, the weight of years lifting in an instant. She ran to the school, to the church, to the river, telling everyone, telling no one, her joy too private for words. She wrote back immediately, her hand flying across the page. "Dearest James, I never stopped believing. Come home. I am waiting." The weeks crawled by, each day brighter than the last. Eleanor busied herself with preparations. She baked bread, sewed curtains, tended the wild roses in her tiny garden. She told herself she would recognize him instantly, though she worried that war might have changed him. She stood at the train station every day at noon, scanning every face, her heart leaping at the sight of every dark-haired man. At last, on a warm afternoon in June, the train from London pulled into the station. The platform was crowded with soldiers and families, laughter and weeping. Eleanor stood back, her hands clenched tight, her heart a drumbeat in her chest. Then she saw him, a little thinner, his hair flecked with grey, a cane in one hand. But it was James. His eyes met hers across the sea of people, and the years melted away. He limped toward her, the crowd parting as if by some silent agreement. She ran to him, and he caught her in his arms, his cane clattering to the ground. For a moment the world was silent, just the two of them holding each other, the scent of rain and coal smoke in the air. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. She touched his face, tracing the lines worn by pain and longing. "I told you I'd come home." She smiled through her tears, her voice steady. "I never stopped believing, James. Not for a single day." They walked together through the city, arm in arm, James leaning on his cane, Eleanor guiding him gently. The city was reborn around them, windows open to the sun, children playing in the streets. the river shining beneath the sky. They spoke little, content to listen to the sound of their footsteps, the heartbeat of a world made new. In the months that followed, James struggled to heal both in body and in spirit. He woke from nightmares, his hands shaking, the memories of war crowding his mind. Eleanor sat with him through the long hours of darkness, reading to him from old poetry books, holding his hand until the dawn crept through the curtains. She never flinched from his pain, never turned away from his grief. She loved him fiercely, with a patience born of years of waiting. They married in the autumn, a small ceremony in the church where they'd first met. Eleanor wore a simple blue dress, her mother's locket at her throat. James wore his uniform, the medals tucked away in a drawer. The war was over, but its shadow lingered. Yet in that quiet church, surrounded by friends and laughter, they found a kind of peace. They built a life together in the city's battered heart. James returned to writing, chronicling not the battles but the stories of those who had survived, the widows, the orphans, the men who limped home. Eleanor continued to teach, her lessons colored now by her own story of hope and endurance. They planted a garden behind their house, roses and wildflowers tangled together, a testament to beauty thriving amid ruin. Sometimes in the quiet of evening, James would sit by the window watching the light fade. Eleanor would join him, her head on his shoulder, their hands entwined. They spoke of the past, of the friends they'd lost, the years stolen by war. But mostly, they spoke of the future, the children they might have, the books they would write, the travels they'd dreamt of once upon a time. Eleanor never forgot the ache of waiting, the sharp edge of hope, but she learned that love once given is never truly lost. It weaves itself into the fabric of days, a thread of gold running through even the darkest hours. She never stopped believing, and in the end her faith became the truest story of all, a story of two souls reunited, of love enduring beyond all reason, of hope that refused to die. And so in a world remade by war, Eleanor and James lived on, proof that the human heart can outlast even the fiercest storms. Their story, whispered in the quiet moments between dusk and dawn, became a beacon for all those who waited, who hoped, who believed that love would find its way home.